Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kwober, and today I'm here with Sean McNamara. His website is mindpossible.com. He has mentored many meditation students for over a decade without any religious overlay, which I find fantastic. And he also trained a group of people that actually won the lottery. So today we are going to push the envelope a little bit further, what consciousness can and cannot do. And without further ado, Sean, welcome to Night Flight.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah.
So, Sean, that is a really interesting field. How did that start for you? I know you're famous for telekinesis experiments, and I also saw your video where you taught a group of people spoon bending.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you end up there?
Well, I'll try and make a long story very short, but basically, ever since I was very young, I had a fear of death because when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I had appendicitis. And that's when I started thinking about my mortality. And even though I was raised in a Catholic family, I wasn't satisfied just being told what to believe. So as an adult, I started studying meditation and Buddhism, thinking that that way I would be able to investigate my own mind and maybe investigate reality and see what's out there and see if I could remove my fear of death. But after many years of trying that, I realized that even spirituality like Buddhism, it's already has its own dogma and it has its own views about what the afterlife is like and reincarnation, and it has its own version. And I think the biggest lesson I received was that anytime someone joins an organization or a tradition or a lineage, their personal search gets set aside, and then their priorities are replaced with the priorities of that tradition.
Mm.
Uh, and so I realized um, many years after starting my path with Buddhism and meditation that I had ignored my quest to investigate what happens after we die. I mean, there are a
Mm.
lot of teachings about what happens in Buddhism, but it wasn't evidence based. So uh, I taught myself how to have out of body experiences using non religious methods. And after I had my first one, my fear of death completely evaporated instantly. And I realized that I had given away my personal power, my personal authority to the teachers that I had worked with and to the traditions. And then I was able to reclaim that after having my out of body experience, realizing I don't need to give any part of myself to anybody else, but I have all my resources inside of me. Of course, if I didn't have access to the techniques, then I'd have a harder time. But luckily, we live in a modern age, and there are all these techniques available through books and the internet. So it's an exciting time. I'm just lucky to be alive in this time when I can research what I need from anywhere in the world and try it out on myself. And I feel very lucky too that in the United States and other countries, we have a degree of freedom where we can explore for
Mm.
ourselves instead of being burned like a witch or being called or just being accused of going against society or things like that. So, but after learning to have out of body experiences, I was still interested in going further because I was already a meditation teacher and I wanted to start teaching my students these things. But the problem with an out of body experience is you can't really you can show someone techniques, but you can't show them the experience itself. They'll just see a body laying down, you know. And I thought, what else is there? And what else exists out there that I can make my own? Because until then, most of what I'd learned in terms of meditation and other forms of spiritual practice, I'd received from someone else. But I wanted something that was just 100% mine.
Mm.
And I think partly because of the out of body experience and my interest in what happens on the other side, I started watching videos about the near death experience. And I saw a presentation by a woman named Shirley Black. She was presenting to the International Association for Near Death Studies. And she's a woman who had three near death experiences. And one thing that happened as a side effect was that she could perform psychokinesis or telekinesis. And initially it was very spontaneous. She tells a story when she was a child, a teacher had gotten angry at her and thrown her notebook across the classroom. And then the next moment, when Shirley got angry, the notebook flew across the room and hit the teacher. And she has other stories about appliances in her kitchen moving by themselves and things like that. But then in that video, she showed how she was trying to control her ability and learn more about it. And she was moving a little piece of tinfoil balanced on a needle inside a container. And I said, this looks legitimate to me, and it looks like something I could probably learn to do myself. I haven't had a near-death experience, but I've had out-of-body experiences. So I thought maybe because I have that in common with her and people like her, maybe I could extend my experience to other abilities. So I spent about 2.5 months, I put that tinfoil in my living room on a needle, and I bought a big glass container. And I sat down in front of that thing every day for 2.5 months. And I'd go online and see what other people were doing online to try and get some tips. And I also applied what I had learned over the years in terms of meditation. For example, that principle that where you place your attention, that's where energy goes, applies in very different, across various aspects of life. And one day, after 2.5 months, that little piece of tinfoil started to move. And so that's how it began with the telekinesis. And I kept working at it. I had to prove to myself over and over again that I wasn't fooling myself, because I thought this could be heat, it could be static electricity. I needed to remove all the doubts. And it just turns out that with my personality, I'm very hard on myself, very doubtful of myself. No matter how much I succeed, I always need to make sure, especially because I wanted to start teaching this to other people. I didn't want to be a fraud. I didn't want to be fooling the public or anything like that. But I kept extending my ability so that I could stand across the room and make the object move, and I could do multiple pieces of paper, tinfoil at the same time, or in different containers. And eventually I could move little pieces, little toothpicks too, and things like that. So it's not like in the movies where I could move very large objects, like in superhero movies or anything like that. It's just very small things, but it was enough for me to see that I was having an effect on the environment around me, dependent on how I was holding my attention. So the way I taught myself how to do this, it requires relaxation and not pushing. I could notice sometimes I'd start trying to, strain and push and try and make the thing move. And that's when it would refuse to move. It was only when I would let go into a deeper part of myself and relax physically, mentally, and emotionally, when the object would start moving again. So in a way, it was performing like a biofeedback device, maybe on a spiritual level or a consciousness level. But that worked. And at the same time, I started taking classes in mediumship here in Denver. And part of that included practicing our psychic ability, our clairvoyance. And that's when I started learning about remote viewing and realizing that it's something that's being used for real jobs, for real investigation, especially during the Cold War when that was developed. By then, I'd already taught many classes on telekinesis and even taught classes on lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences. But then I wanted to teach this psychic ability, because the way my teacher taught me, I like to say it was like a swimming teacher just shoving the children in the swimming pool, trusting that they know how to swim. It's already inside of them. And that's how she trained us. She just put us into certain exercises, trusted that we could do it. She just taught us how to hold our mind. And we saw that we could actually perceive information that was hidden from us, and that anyone could really do it. I mean, it wasn't 100% successful every time, but there was enough success where we saw there's something to this. And I started doing exercises on my own at home. And then I got involved with an organization called the Applied Precognition Project. It's run by a man named Marty Rosenblatt, and he's a very wonderful man. And he likes having a lot of fun with this. And his group is involved with using clairvoyance or remote viewing to predict the outcome of events in the future. And do you have a little friend there, a little kitty? That's great. And I decided to experiment with something called associative remote viewing, which is used to predict future events. And I was at a conference in Las Vegas. It was a UFO conference, actually. But I decided to try this experiment with my wife, who was back in Denver. And I said, let's see if we can predict a hockey game. And so she set up some targets for this remote viewing experiment. And I did the viewing all the way in Las Vegas, because down in the casino, I could place a bet. And we did this experiment, and we made a prediction, and the right hockey team won. It was just very fun. And we tried it 3 times that weekend, and we won 2 out of 3 times. So got very interested in this and got more involved with the Applied Precognition Project and training myself and training other people. And then I started working with a select group of people here in Denver. And we decided to see if we could predict the outcome of a lottery here in Colorado called the Pick 3 lottery. So it's not the big lottery. The big Colorado lottery, you have to choose the 6 correct numbers out of 42 numbers. It's very difficult. But with the Pick 3 lottery, there are going to be 3 numbers that are drawn, and each one is from 0 to 9. So we're basically trying to determine, of those 10 numbers, 0 to 9, how can we predict which 3 numbers will be drawn and which 7 numbers will not be drawn? So I always tried to get a team of 10 viewers. And the first time we won, we only had 8. So we got lucky because we ended up predicting enough of the numbers that were likely to win. And we bought combinations of numbers. And 2 of the people in our group bought the correct numbers of the winning numbers. And then 2 months later, we did it again. And this time, I think we had 9 or 10 people. And we did an even more accurate prediction. And 4 or 5 of us out of a group of 10 people won, or we bought the correct combination of tickets. The tricky part is we're always wanting to get only 3 potential winning numbers. But what happens if we get 4? That means we have to buy tickets with different combinations of numbers. And hopefully one of those tickets will have the winning combination. And it worked. And so, this team of people I've been working with, and they're just friends now. They're my friends. And we did 4 attempts in my living room, and we won 2 out of those 4 attempts. And we always do other experiments together when we gather, because it's a full day of exploration and a full day of this experiment of trying to do these psychic predictions. And so to get things more exciting, we'll do some psychokinesis. So lately we've been doing a lot of spoon bending. But last time we did this, last time we attempted, I wanted to test them. So we'd already bent spoons and forks. So I bought some 3-foot long steel rods. They were 1/4 inch thick, and a couple of steel plates that were 10 inches long and a couple of inches wide, and some metal pegs for pegboards. Those were about 8 inches long. And I tried to bend them with all my muscular effort. I couldn't bend them. So I thought this would be a good test. And I brought these items the last time we gathered. And 2 women in our group were able to bend the 3-foot long metal poles. And there was a man in our group that was able to bend that steel plate all the way around into a horseshoe. And I was able to bend one of those metal steel pegs into 90 degrees using the very same method that we used for spoon bending, just to show that it's not a limitation of the size or the strength of the spoon. That if we just open up more, if we use more energy in a positive way, and especially with a group interaction, I think the friendship, the friendliness, the comfort, and the relaxation, and the sense of fun is a very important ingredient to all these exercises. So in a way, the last couple of years have just been a journey of lots of discovery. And we're in the beginning, I started all by myself. Now it's really about what I'm doing with other people and showing them that they have this ability within themselves, and that the universe is a lot more mysterious than many of us have believed that it was, which can be quite frustrating, because I think we all want to know how this stuff works. And we all encounter pseudo skeptics doing something evil or whatever. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of pushback from the public because I share a lot of what I do online. So there's a lot of pushback still, even in the 21st century. But I think we're just on the edge. We're just getting started with learning more, especially using scientific methods to try and discover what's happening here. But for me, it's always been a spiritual journey. So I don't really care what scientists have to say or what non-believers have to say about this. For me, it's about what I believe inside, what I saw with my own eyes, what I feel in my heart, and what gives me confidence about being a human being on the planet, and what gives me confidence about what happens after we die. So it's just been an amazing journey of discovery, and it's a journey that anyone can take, and especially because it's not excuse me, because it's not regulated by a religion or dogma. It's not under anyone's control. I think in a way, the field of parapsychology, the paranormal, psychic ability, it's like the Wild West here in America. It's that frontier. It's the undiscovered country. There are no rules. People are trying to put rules on it in certain ways, I think, but still there are very few rules. And if someone is willing to put in the time and energy to look at their own mind and to try different kinds of experiments, they can make some amazing discoveries and develop their own belief systems about it, or their own, try and explain it in their own way, instead of just giving over their authority to what someone else's opinion is or what someone else thinks it is. So in a way, it's still the undiscovered country, you know. And I think it's a gift now because of technology and the internet that we can share these techniques with each other, that people can make their own experiments and share their discoveries widely. So information, more than any other time in the world in history, information is spreading very quickly, very freely. And so it's a very rich time to be an explorer of consciousness, I think, and a spiritual person in a free way. So,
Yeah. You already mentioned two words, telekinesis and psychokinesis. What's the difference there?
hmm so I'd say telekinesis is under the umbrella of psychokinesis. So if I look at the root of the word psychokinesis, psycho being mind or spirit, and kinesis, movement or change. Uh, and that's something you can do that includes when you're touching the object. So with spoon bending, we might be holding the object with both our hands, or doing healing on someone, you might be touching them with your hand. But in telekinesis, the root tele, meaning distance or separation, kinesis, so movement over a distance, meaning that there's no physical contact with the object that you're trying to move in any way, which I think includes making sure that there are no ordinary physical causes that might be producing physical contact. So static electricity or heat or things like that, you need to be able to remove those variables as much as possible. So telekinesis just means not touching it, but it's a part of psychokinesis, meaning everything we're doing is based on our intention and the way we're paying attention to the situation.
Okay.
So,
So what would you tell people that inform you that you are actually not working with your consciousness, but that you are in touch with demons? Have you ever had that?
oh, well, I get those comments once in a while. I used to more in the beginning when I was putting more videos online. I get a lot of public remarks. I think I've read more of the Bible in YouTube comments than I have when I was a Catholic, because people will send me their quotes from the Bible. And in that case, I always remember the quote from the Bible where Jesus says that, all these gifts and more that you can do, that, there's that quote from him that's saying that anyone can do these things, that they open themselves up. But one thing I learned right away is you really can't have online arguments with people. It's not the proper place to try and convince someone. And you really can't convince someone to change their belief systems. So I usually just remain quite silent, or at the very most, I'll encourage someone to try it for themselves. Because when someone has personal experience and success in their experience, that's the only thing that can really change their mind, especially when they do it by themselves. No one's watching. So they're not concerned with preserving their self-image for the public. So if they're doing this by themselves in a private place and they make their own unique discovery, then there's a possibility that they might change what they believe and realize that there are no negative forces involved. And it's really not a religious thing. It's not even a spiritual thing. It's a matter of consciousness. There's something called the observer effect. And it's a phrase that comes from explorations in quantum physics. And what scientists have discovered is that if you pay attention to very small particles like photons or electrons, they behave differently than they do when a human is not paying attention to what's happening there. And I think that's exactly what's happening with psychokinesis and telekinesis. It's really just the application of attention. And it's not about being good or bad. It's just being aware of what's happening. So it's a very neutral thing.
Grab a drink.
Okay.
So we are back, and yeah, there are two things going on with psychic abilities. They are either ridiculed as mumbo jumbo, and these are all nut jobs, the people that work with that and believe in that, or it is demonized.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that very interesting, that there seems to be a concerted effort to suppress the information that we are so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And it works either that way or that way. You demonize it and you ridicule it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think there is a purpose behind that? Demonizing it and ridiculing it?
No, I think it's just basic human behavior. People respond with fear or ignorance, not just with psychic abilities, but anything in life. When someone sees something that they don't understand or that's different from them, I think it's part of the survival mechanism that humans have, they're born with, to accept what's known, what's safe, what's understandable, and reject anything that doesn't fit in. It's purely a survival mechanism, I think. But these days, we don't need those ancient survival mechanisms. So I think it's important to recognize in ourselves when that part of our brain is operating for survival, and realize that we don't have to follow through on those emotions. If we feel fear or worry or rejection, that we don't have to actually believe it and actually open ourselves up further instead. That we need some sort of social education, excuse me. Sorry. But we need some sort of social education, I think, publicly, to tell people what's happening when we're acting from a survival point of view and how we can get over that, because people are not taught that in schools. Human beings still very much operate in terms of aggression as a defense mechanism, even though it's unnecessary. We have technology, we have intelligence, we have logic. We can apply those to create a more peaceful world and to open ourselves up to connect to people who are different from us and to see viewpoints that are different from us. If we're aware of what's happening inside our mind, but most people are not, we're just very reactive creatures. I think it's very much like the Captain Kirk versus Spock problem in Star Trek, where Spock is very logical and cool-minded, and Kirk is just an emotional beast. And they work very well together. But I think these days, because the human race has so much power to destroy itself, it's time to start thinking a lot more carefully about how we use our minds and when it's important to identify that we're operating from a very defensive, fear-based paradigm, and to set that aside and realize that we are quite safe that it's okay to look at other perspectives, and we don't have to attack everything that looks different from us.
Mm. Yeah. So I heard somebody else who is a physicist, and he's also experimenting with telekinesis and remote viewing. Um, his career has been established, and he's doing that sort of as a side thing, because he said when you start out as a physicist doing that, you will ruin your career.
Yes.
First, you establish your career, and then you can do it as a side thing. But don't start out with that, because everybody will just call you a nut job. And then that's the end of your career as a physicist. So
Yes.
anyway, he said that he talked about micro telekinesis and macro, moving the small thing and the bigger things. So he said it seems that with micro telekinesis, that works via exchange of information, versus macro telekinesis, that has to do with the exchange of energy. Would you agree? And if so, what is that exchange? How do we understand this?
Right. Well, that's a very interesting way to separate them out. When I started doing this with a piece of tinfoil or paper or toothpicks, I thought I was sending energy from my body out to the object to push it.
Mm.
That's how I used my hands in the beginning. And then I could do it without my hands, but I still thought that energy was somehow being transferred from me to it. But then I heard from a couple of scientists. One of them is Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Science. And he suggested the idea that maybe what's happening is that I'm not really moving the object directly, but what's happening is the movement of the air molecules inside the container is changing from a random process where they're bouncing around in all directions to a more cohesive or coherent process where some of the molecules are aligning because I'm paying attention to them, and then they push on the object. And if they change the speed of their movement, it might actually increase the heat inside the container, because heat is just a reflection of movement of the molecules. So in that way, heat is involved, but it's produced because of the increased movement, not the other way around. So if that's the case, and I don't think we've proved it, I think it's a great hypothesis, but I think there's a lot more work to be done to say that there's 100% evidence for that. But if that's what's happening, it means that I'm not sending energy to those air molecules. Instead, I'm changing the informational structure, the informational instructions for how they're supposed to move by paying attention to them. So I used to call it macro telekinesis or macro psychokinesis because I was moving a large object, the tinfoil, not a photon or an electron. But now I don't think that's the case. I think it's still micro psychokinesis because I'm not moving the tinfoil, I'm moving the little air molecules instead.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of people like Nina Kulagina from the Cold War, the Russian psychic, she can move much heavier objects. And when she would do her experiments, it would take 8 hours in a day, and her heart rate would accelerate to a great degree. She would lose several pounds of body weight in one day. So it seemed that some sort of energy consumption was happening in her body to produce the effect of moving these heavy objects. But I'm not sure. She ended up passing because of a heart attack. So I think this was overall a very stressful thing for her. Versus my technique, which is very, I shouldn't say my technique because many people do this way, but the technique that I use is very relaxing, it's very meditative. And so for me, I think what's happening there is more about an information reprogramming of the behavior of the air molecules. I've done some experiments with healing energy, and you can see that there are physical changes happening in the person on a very subtle level. It's been measured, and many people have done this kind of research to show that changes actually happen in people's physical structure. And when I'd done it in the past, I thought I was, again, sending energy from my hand, like Qigong healing or something else like that was happening. But I wonder if energy is really just a placeholder word to represent what's happening as the change of information. So let's say someone feels like they're sending energy from their body to that person. That might just be a symbolic representation for the reprogramming of the information. Even if a person feels like energy is moving from their hand, or a person is receiving healing energy and they have a sensation like something is coming in, or they feel it on their skin, it might still not be that a beam of energy is going from one place to another. The sensation might come from the restructuring of the information, from the reprogramming that's happening by the way we're using our minds. So I think a lot more research will be done and needs to be done, but lately I've become a lot more interested in the idea that there's really no information, or there's no energy transfer at all, that it's all purely informational change. And I know right now a lot of us are talking about quantum physics because it's the best model we have right now to explain this. I hope that in the next 100 or 200 years, we'll have an even better model, but it's the best we have. And it's, do you remember in the 70s and the 80s when the word Zen was so popular? It was used for everything. I think that's how quantum physics is these days. You use quantum for everything, which is interesting and maybe inaccurate in a lot of cases. But with quantum physics, we do have this thing about entanglement, where you can entangle two small particles, two electrons or two photons, so that they're behaving in the same way. And what they've done with entanglement experiments is seen that when you change the behavior of one of the paired elements, the other one changes its behavior at the exact same time, even if they're separated across vast distances. If you change this, it's called spin, the movement of one of those particles, the other one many miles away changes instantly. And that gives us a clue that if the change is instant, it means nothing is being sent from one location to the other, because that would take time. There would be a delay. Because it's instant means something else is happening, which indicates it's more informational. And I think it's not just the information about those two photons or the two particles. It could be information about the entire universe that's changing in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't even know what to think after saying something like that, but I think there are a lot wider implications about what's happening when we're paying attention. When our minds agree on a certain situation, we have what's called a consensus reality. We all experience the same thing in the city or the planet. But when one of us changes our mind and starts perceiving something differently, are they only changing their experience of being alive, or are they changing the entire universe in some way? And it might not be perceptible to anyone else, but I think because of the interconnectedness of all of reality, you can't just say that information has changed in this one small location, producing the effect. If you change it there, you must be changing it through cause and effect and through relationship everywhere in the universe. Reality changes moment by moment entirely. I don't know if you can just locate it in the one small location.
Mm-hmm. So this Russian lady that you talked about that died of a heart attack, have you heard of other people that had problems who were capable of moving bigger objects and they ran into physical stress?
Yes, there was one young man who I really loved watching his videos, and I think they're still there on YouTube. His name is Fadi Mir, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I think he's from Turkey. His name is Fademir, for anyone who wants to look him up. And he could do things like set a pack of cigarettes across the room and knock it over with his mind,
Mm-hmm.
and move other larger objects like that. But if you watch his videos, you can see that he's very much straining the way Nina Kulagina was straining. There's a lot of effort there, a lot of very think it was in 2017 or maybe 2018, but I think 2017, I saw a post on Facebook or somewhere announcing that he had passed. And it was either a heart attack or a heart attack in connection with some sort of aneurysm. I don't know if it was a brain aneurysm or one of his arteries or something like that. But he died very quickly. And if I didn't know about Nina Kulagina's passing from a heart attack, I wouldn't have made that connection. The other thing that makes me wonder about this is there are many times when I've done telekinesis experiments of my own, when I break my own rules, because in my instructions, I say, relax. The more you relax, the more it moves. That I would become very goal oriented or trying to do something bigger and better. And by the end of the night, I'd be straining and I'd be pushing very hard, going against my own instructions. And what I would notice is that I'd feel a heart pain at the end of the night, this ache, which is scary for me because I had heart surgery when I was 25 years old. And so I'm very careful about my heart and I don't want to do anything to endanger it. And so I really, every time I sense that I'm trying too hard and that heartache comes, I have to stop completely and go in another direction or just give up entirely. It's just not worth it for me. But I think it's something that we need to learn more about. And maybe that's where the energetic aspect comes in. Maybe energy is still involved because if we have the subtle energy system in the body, like the meridians or the channels or the chakras, or whatever system we want to use to label that, or the human aura, maybe that is having a role somehow. Maybe not directly with sending energy to the object, but energy is a key component of awareness and consciousness. So if I'm straining very hard with my focus and trying to produce an effect out there, am I pulling too much on the natural energy in my body to try and create that effect? Just trying too hard. So in that way, energy might be involved. And I think there are a lot of studies and a lot of research has been done to show that people who work with their energy, the people who practice Qigong, have a heightened psychic ability compared to people who don't do something to actively build and store their energy in their body. And the same thing goes with meditation. Meditators generally do a lot better with things like lucid dreaming than non-meditators do. And even though a meditator might not be specifically working on their energy system, just a simple act of relaxation and quieting the mind does a lot to conserve the energy in the body automatically. So in that sense, I think energy is involved. But I think it's very important to be careful when someone feels pain in their body. They should stop right away because I think we're forcing ourselves to do something that's unhealthy at that point. I don't think it's worth the risk. But some people might naturally contain an abundance of energy, or they train themselves. Maybe they're athletic, or they do a lot of martial arts or something like that. And then they can go a little further than the rest of us because there's less risk to them. I mean, everyone has to find out on their own. But still, there are no rules. But I think it's basic guidance is don't hurt yourself. It's not worth it.
So you already mentioned relaxation, that is important, at least with your method. And how does the attitude of those people who are experimenting affect the outcome? If they are pessimistic, neutral, or very optimistic that they can do it? Did you notice that there is a difference?
Yes. I've probably taught several hundreds, if not more, people in a classroom setting. So I teach them in 2 hours, they can do everything I can do. But I can tell right away who is going to be more successful at the beginning. Usually by the end, everyone is at about the same level. But in the first hour, some people will succeed a lot quicker than the others. The main difference that I notice is that if there's an engineer in the classroom or a physicist or a researcher, and I'm giving them instructions to relax and how to use their eyes, how to do the breathing technique and all that stuff, and they're trying to get it to move, they have a very hard time in the beginning because I can see what's happening in their mind. They're trying to use logic. They're trying to understand what's happening physically, what's happening psychically, what's happening with consciousness at that moment. So in a way, they're watching themselves in a very left-brained, I know that's an old-fashioned term now, left brain versus right brain, but they're being
Mm.
very logical. They're thinking, they're probably focused in the beta wavelength spectrum of the brain activity, very awake, very conscious. And they're looking at themselves, trying to figure out what's happening while they're applying the technique. And you can't do that with this style of telekinesis. Instead, you have to be right-brained, relaxed, creative, open-minded, open to the unknown, even dipping down into the alpha and theta states, which are meditative, relaxing, just very much deeper states. And being physically relaxed helps with that. And simply being open to the possibility and just looking and being either neutral or positive is very helpful. So those people succeed very quickly. Complete non-believers tend to not attend my classes, so I don't know what would happen there. The other difficulty that happens once in a while is people come, for example, energy healers, and they've been trained in a specific way of using their attention and their energy. So, for example, a Reiki practitioner, they know the symbol that they make, and they use their hand in a certain way. Or other healers might use other signals or other movement with their arms and hands. But the way I teach telekinesis is any muscular tension in the body, including moving the arms in a certain way, takes away the effect because it's a form of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people have a hard time trusting me when I'm giving them these instructions, and they still want to do it their own way. They want to apply their healing energy technique to the telekinesis, and sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't.
Mm.
So what I tell people when they come to the class is, please, just for 2 hours, set aside everything you know, set aside everything you believe, and just follow these very basic instructions. They're so simple, and try it. And after you've succeeded, then take it home and burn the instructions if you want, or recreate them in your own way, combine them with your healing instructions, make your own brand new instructions. There's no rules, and I don't feel any sense of ownership about how people do these things or how they explore. I'm just sharing what I know. But if they come with preconceived ideas or their own rules, that gets in the way. So it's a requirement for people to be very open-minded and to trust
Yes.
me just for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then they can take what they learned and use it in any way they want or throw it away.
So in other words, the ones that have no idea about this, have no knowledge at all and no concept, they are better off than the ones that have been doing energy work?
If the energy worker refuses to let go of their technique.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they might be standing there, because at a certain point in my class, about an hour into it, I encourage people to stand up and step several feet away and maintain the movement of the object. But I tell them, don't do anything funny with your hands. No funny business. Don't wave your arms around. We're not doing anything like Harry Potter. We're not waving magic wands. Just leave your arms down and just use your eyes and feel your body very relaxed. But then I start seeing people doing stuff with their hands, and there's tension there, and they're trying to do something, and it limits the possibilities. It limits the effect.
Yeah.
But then the healers who come and they can set aside the instructions that they've been trained with, they're usually the most successful, because what makes someone, or what gives someone a healing ability, is implicit. They already have it in them. The technique is just extra, but who they are inside, their energy, their sense of love and compassion, it's there all the time. And so healers overall do very well with telekinesis. It's just a matter of, for a couple moments, don't do some of that extra stuff that they've been trained in.
Okay. Have you ever investigated the field of psychic animals? Because I stumbled on that finches showed some cognitive abilities, and even an earthworm
Oh,
showed the same signs. So that, to me, I found that very interesting because, first of all, I certainly think that, the ones that are telling you you're working with demons, I don't think that animals are working with demons. And
right.
yeah. And so there seems to be something that connects us. Even the animal kingdom has that
Hmm.
capability. And who would have thought that even an earthworm could show signs like that? Have you ever investigated that? Or does it
Well,
surprise you?
it doesn't really surprise me. What comes to mind first is our cat Jack died several years ago, and there were times after he died when it still felt in the middle of the night when someone would come and sit down in bed. We could feel him walking across the bed. So that's very interesting. So I think there's animals too that at their root they are consciousness, and when the body passes, that's all that passes. The mind continues. So it's not surprising that we think we're special, that we're different from animals. But the thing is, consciousness really just needs a physical environment that is complex enough for it to enter or collaborate with to manifest in the physical world. I think humans are special because we have the brain structure that we have, so we can communicate, we can be creative, we can plan for the future, which many animals don't seem to do or don't do as much as we do. It is because of the complexity of the human brain that we can do this. But the consciousness that we are might not be very different from the consciousness of a worm. So when the worm dies and the human being dies, and those two consciousnesses maybe have a conversation on the other side, maybe they're not very different from each other. It's just that the consciousness that resided in the human body had better equipment than the consciousness that resided inside the worm. It's like the difference between using an iPhone today and a Commodore 64 from 1984. That old computer. It's just different physical framework for injecting the consciousness into. So, which doesn't bring down the human consciousness, it actually raises up the animal consciousness, that we do have about the same ability, or at least I wouldn't be surprised to find out if that's the case. I've recently read a study. There's an author, a researcher named Claude Swanson, and he has these books filled with research about paranormal and psychic abilities. And I was just reading about an experiment in which these researchers were using a kitten in a room to monitor or to try and measure when someone was having an out of body experience and going to that room. So what they did is they drew squares on the floor of that room and they put the kitten there. And the idea was that if the kitten noticed that this person was having an out of body experience and was traveling inside the room, that the kitten would stop moving so much and they'd be still, they'd probably be a little bit nervous or apprehensive, but they would, how animals just notice when there's something in the room. We can't see it, but animals are seeing something in the room. I mean, anyone with a dog or a cat has that experience where the animal is just meowing or barking at the wall. Like, what's going on? But maybe they're seeing something that we're not. So this experiment happened where they used the kitten and they measured how much the kitten moved from one square to another and how many times it meowed in a certain time frame. And then the person having the out-of-body experience was, and they would have specific times when that person would go out of body and travel to where the kitten is. And they would videotape the kitten and measure when it was meowing and when it was moving around versus when it was quiet and pensive and very still. And the results seemed to indicate that the kitten was perceiving the out-of-body traveler when they were in the room. So that's very interesting. The other experiment that comes to mind is it has to do with using a random number generator. So this has been going on for a long time. It started with the PEAR Lab, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, where they were seeing how the consciousness could affect the output of a random number generator. And they saw that it can affect it. Well, one researcher eventually did an experiment where they created a little robot and put a random number generator in it. And if random number generator was behaving completely random, then the robot would move in a random way throughout the room. And they made this little robot look like a chicken or like a hen. And then they put a glass wall in the room. And on the other side of the wall were a bunch of little baby chickens. And so the chickens were there and they could see the mama chicken, the robot, in the other room. And so all the little baby chicks were calling for their mother, their robot mother. And the researchers saw that the random number generator inside the robot started behaving in a non-random way. It was responding to the consciousness of the baby chickens. So it was moving gradually closer and closer to the glass wall because the baby chicks were calling the robot to come closer to them. So even animals can do psychokinesis.
So have you ever investigated, this is just my personal interest, the difference between death and what we call full anesthesia? I tell you why I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I had my anesthesia, up to this day, I'm still wondering, where did my consciousness go? It was as if somebody just flipped the switch. And there was not even the perception of nothingness, darkness, anything. And some people even report that patients pick up the conversation where they left it off before they put yeah. And so no, they're absolutely nothing. So I really wonder what is the difference there.
Yes, that's so interesting because I had a similar experience when I had my heart surgery when I was age 25. And I had just started meditating. I'd probably been meditating for 1 or 2 years at that point. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's this practice called the clear light practice that's very
I know
advanced.
that. I practiced Tibetan Buddhism as well for a couple of years.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the clear light practice, I thought my upcoming heart surgery would be an interesting way to experiment with that. That if after the anesthesia enters my system and my brain blacks out, could I maintain consciousness during the surgery? So before the surgery started, I was sitting in the operating table meditating outside the operating room. And then they took me inside the operating room and the anesthesiologist started giving me the anesthesia. And he said, okay, now please start counting backwards, 100, 99, 98. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hold on to my consciousness, to my awareness, even when my body is under anesthesia. I probably got to 97. Boof, nothing. Nothing. And then I woke up and the surgery was successful and they're wheeling me out of the operating room. And I was so frustrated. I was so upset. And it really scared me because I thought maybe we are just flesh and blood. Maybe we're just living computers. And when you turn off the operating system, there's nothing left, and death is final death, and there's nothing left. You know, I really struggled with that. It really put a lot of doubt in my mind. Since then, all the psychic experiences I've had, thankfully, have reversed that feeling for me. There's too much psychic evidence to show that the mind extends beyond the physical body. But in that case, so the anesthesia is very interesting. That it was lights out, complete blackness, no consciousness whatsoever. But the same thing happens when we go to sleep every night. Our brain enters the delta wavelength for many hours of the night. That's when we go into healing. Physically, the brain and the body goes through a healing process, and we're just blacked out. So it might just be a time of sleep, and the consciousness, maybe if someone is better trained, they can maintain their consciousness at that point. And of course, thousands of years of yogis, they claim to be able to do this when they're in the deepest aspect of sleep, that they still maintain some type of awareness. And I've had experiences like that in deep meditation and also in sleep when I was able to maintain awareness. But the anesthesia issue is very interesting, and I would be curious to know if there's any research or collected anecdotes of people who were under anesthesia and maintained their awareness while they were out. Now there are many stories of people who had near-death experiences on the operating table,
Mm.
and they have an out-of-body experience, and they see what's happening in the room or even outside the room.
Mm.
Then they recover from surgery, tell their friends or their doctor about it, and then they get verification of what they saw.
Mhm.
So that kind of information is important. Maybe I should have tried to have an out-of-body experience during my heart surgery instead of trying to practice the clear light technique. But at the time, I wasn't practicing. I didn't know that much about the out-of-body experience. I knew about it, but I hadn't succeeded. I hadn't even started seriously training at it.
Mm.
So maybe that's a different kind of experiment that we could do, is for someone who's very proficient at leaving their body, let's give them some anesthesia and see what happens, see if they can do it. Because there are a lot of difficulties there. The out-of-body experience is very delicate. It's unpredictable. I think
Mm.
very few people in the world can actually do it on command every time they want to do it. That seems very, very rare.
Our technological world, I mean, we have a lot of gadgets. So instant
Mm-hmm.
messaging and what we are using now, very helpful, very useful.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, sometimes I look at all that and I think that's all a substitute for what we could do naturally if we were at that stage to use our abilities to the fullest. Would you agree?
I think so. One thought that I have often is, with the increasing popularity and interest in artificial intelligence
Mm.
and quantum computing, I often wonder if in 50 or 100 years, science and technology will be so developed and so successful at artificial intelligence that what they realize is they've really recreated the human brain. I think we're headed to just creating a human being artificially.
Mm.
And what we're going to find is what we already are. We're just taking a very long, painful way to do it. Why can't we just appreciate the human existence, the human body, and the human consciousness? We already have it. But humans being what they are, we want to make things our way. We want to do it on our own. So we're going to develop these computers and quantum systems and artificial intelligence. And at the end, we're going to have another type of human. It might be a robot, but it's going to be sufficiently complex to house a non-physical consciousness, I think.
Mm. So now I lost my thought. Okay, we have all these movies, TV series, yeah, that are showing us superhumans and that can move cars, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I love those movies.
Yeah, me too. I gravitate towards that because I like to know what the game is showing me.
Uh-huh.
And so we also know that the governments are training remote viewers. So, and then at the same time, as you said, we have this push for AI. I sometimes wonder if this, because I have a feeling that this push for AI is intensifying a lot. And I sometimes wonder if that push is coming on so hard so that we do not figure out what we are capable of before they start merging us with the machine. You know what I mean? The transition
Right.
that really come from a materialistic point of view.
Hmm.
And yeah, even there you have a big deal of fear of death, I would say, with the transhumanists.
Yes. Oh, that's such a big topic. I want to try and remember everything that just came to mind when you said that. But one thing is that I think one factor that might be driving artificial intelligence and quantum computing is the issue of control.
Hmm.
Because if you have extraordinarily fast computing systems, it means that there's no such thing as unbreakable security anymore. You can calculate the correct password for any encryption system in the blink of an eye if it's sufficiently fast enough. So it's basically just grinding out the mathematical equations to break any code. And when you can do that, you can essentially control all systems, and human race has become dependent on all these electronics storage systems and informational systems. So I think to some degree, it's very much about control. And also these quantum systems or these very fast computing systems can read human expression. And with video technology, the notion of advertising and social control, social manipulation, the people who control those systems will have far more control over human behavior because of these systems. And sadly, because these systems will be so entertaining, we're going to buy into them. We already are. We're going to go along with the ride. And because of the power of the technology that's essentially doing what psychic abilities do, we're not using our minds that way anymore. I think my guess is just a guess, it's just a hypothesis that humans in general were far more psychic before 100 or 200 years ago, with the birth of industry, communication, electricity, things like that. Before then, people had to depend more for their survival on making the right decision about where to hunt, when to plant, to know when a loved one is suffering in the next valley, to know where the medicine is found in the forest. These days, we don't have to use that ability anymore. I think on some level, it'll always be available inside of us. As long as our consciousness is inside our body, it'll be there. But it's like a muscle, and if you don't exercise it, it becomes very weak and ineffective after a while. I don't know if people who are in control of AI or information systems really care whether or not we're truly psychic.
Mm.
But I think that, and the thing about being psychic or psychic perception is it's not 100%. It's not always accurate. And it doesn't give the same amount of information that you can gain from using a computer to hack someone's storage system and read their hard drive.
Hmm.
It's very specific. It's very usable information, and you can use it to get power and resources, information, money, things like that. So the people who are materialistically inclined and who have the means to use technology, it's in their interest to develop the technology instead of developing psychic ability, because it'll be a lot more reliable. And I don't think they're concerned about psychics who can gain information from them, because I think very few psychics on the planet have the ability to retrieve information at the level of detail that you could get from hacking someone's computer network. So, but then, that automatically takes us into this deeper question about what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Are we concerned with material success and gain, that I can control an entire culture because I can modify their behavior and live maybe to 80 or 90 years and make a lot of money and just
Donate to
look,
Lawyers Without
yeah,
Yeah.
right? Or can life be bigger than that? Can we use our time on earth in this lifetime to investigate what is consciousness? How do we help each other? Can we make the planet a better place than when we were born? When we leave, when we die and cross over, will our friends and family be happier for knowing us? Will the planet be healthier and stronger because we were here? And unfortunately, right now, I think it's going in the opposite direction, that maybe we're at a point of crisis that will wake us up. I think, I think we're reaching a point in human history where at the end, we're going to have one last religion. And the religion will be something we should all be practicing right now. And it's a religion about living with a lot less material entertainments, consuming less plastic, consuming less fuel and energy, becoming more simple, getting our sense of meaning and purpose in life through our connections with other people, through relationship, instead of by consuming, whether it's food, drugs, entertainment, objects, automobiles, whatever it is. If we continue seeking happiness from that perspective, we'll continue destroying our planet. But if we maintain or get our sense of meaning and personal worth from how we make other people feel, how we maintain our sense of connection with nature, we might have a chance of saving the planet. And the thing is, if we start living that way now, maybe we have a chance to save the planet for the next 5 generations. If we don't practice that way now, we will be forced to practice that way for the last couple generations of humans, because the planet will be in such a state that we're not going to be concerned with making a better car or getting the next product in 24 hours or watching television. We're going to be concerned with how can we get more oxygen? How can we get food? How can we get fresh water? And we'll be living in very simple ways just to try and survive. All our resources and all our attention will be that way. And the sad thing is, if we live that way now and become happier because of it, our planet can survive. Or the last remaining humans will be forced to live that way, that it won't be producing happiness. We'll just be terrified until the very end. And it sounds very, very sad or frightening or negative, but I think it's, we're losing our leisure. We can't keep abusing the planet. We can't keep waiting for someone else to save it. You know, it's not going to be saved by governments or the corporations. In the end, it's all the individuals on the planet who buy the products. You know, it's where we spend our dollars or Deutschmarks. Is it the Deutschmark?
No, we have the euro, remember?
The euro, that's right.
There was something
Jeez,
like the
I'm
EU.
so sorry. Sorry. There's my ignorance right there. But
yeah,
you know, we're
but we had that, and I
yeah.
know that currency.
So where we spend our energy in the form of money and time will determine the fate of the world. Not what our governments or corporations do, because we feed them by how we vote and how we spend our money. So how we find happiness, is it going to be by spending money, or will it be by being with each other in a human way, right? That's just my thought, but it keeps me awake at night more and more.
Yeah, retracting our energy from certain companies just by, you know, really boycotting them. I do that with a lot of companies, but it seems that is too much to ask for a lot of people.
It is almost too much to ask. I think it goes back to the way the human brain works for survival. And because we have so much intelligence, we're able to extract so many resources from the earth. So where in the past we could only eat a certain amount because only a certain amount of food was available, we would eat as much as we could. And it still wouldn't make us sick. And we didn't have to eat artificial food. But now there's so much poisonous food available that we still have that survival mechanism in the brain that we eat as if we're not going to get another meal for another 5 days. We eat to survive, even though we don't need to anymore. We still, especially political and military leaders and even local leaders, respond to situations with that survival mechanism, with aggression and unwillingness to cooperate with each other, and also the way we seek happiness in physical objects or buying products. It's all about accumulation and gaining it and things like that. And that's very much programmed into the survival mechanism of the subconscious brain. And if we could just educate the new humans, our children or each other, to know that all this stuff we're doing, all the consumerism, is just a leftover from our development over hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years. And we don't need to actually follow through on that. But it's a system of education that really doesn't exist. It's not widespread. But if we understood that, we'd know that we didn't have to buy a new car every other year. We didn't have to buy a new cell phone when the current one goes out of style. That we
I
don't
don't
have
even
to
have
eat.
one.
Oh, congratulations, So you've eliminated a degree of stress from your life by not even owning one of those things.
It felt a little bit funny the first couple of days, but after that, I have to tell you, whenever I looked at other people, no matter where we were, always checking their messages,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was sitting there and thinking, this is the real luxury. I don't have to do that.
Right. See, and a lot of what's happening, you just touched on another important topic in terms of the human brain and why we're driving ourselves to extinction, is because of the function of neurotransmitters in the brain, such as dopamine, which can be an addictive component that contributes to our behavior, our habitual addictive behavior. So a cell phone is a form of addiction, depending on what you look at. But looking at Facebook or other social media or the news, you can, in about 1 minute, you can go through 100 or more emotional states. And each one is stimulating the production of certain neurotransmitters in the mind. It's like taking drugs. And the same thing goes for the consumption of sugar or artificial food. It all affects the neurotransmitters in the mind and also the bacteria in the gut, which directly affect our emotional states. And so it seems like a lot of the human population is running around addicted to their own neurotransmitters because they're being overstimulated by technology and overstimulated by poisonous food and things like that. So it's systemic, and it's not, we can't just blame the individual, like, oh, it's your fault that you're addicted to your Facebook account, and you can't. It's everywhere, and it's, we buy our food from the grocery store, and who's providing that food and who's setting the regulations for what food is sold and how it's prepared. And unfortunately right now, everything is profit driven, not wellness driven. And that's because the leaders of corporations and government are just human beings like you and me. All they want is to accumulate for their own survival. They want to experience that dopamine. They want to experience that oxytocin, the pleasure, the connection, and they get a lot of that from their own success and their sense of power and their sense of self-worth. So in a way, they're not to blame either. They have the same equipment inside their brain that we have. They just have more power. And unfortunately, because of that, there's a lot of damage. And I'm sure a lot of it is unintentional damage that they're doing to the world, because they just want to be happy too. But we're trying to be happy like our ancient Cro-Magnon and the cavemen, the people, the Neanderthals. But we don't need to be happy the way they need it to be anyway. I mean, it's still wired into the brain, but we're more intelligent than that. And if we can identify those behaviors and realize the way we're making ourselves addicted to media and bad food or other influences, then we could break those habits the way you've separated yourself from your mobile phone, and you don't suffer from overstimulation anymore, and you have a sense of peace.
Yeah,
if we could just educate people about that, and they'd have to take a chance and go on a break from all their media and all the technology and realize that they're happier without it. But it's tricky because how do you survive in this world if you have a job where you work for a company that demands that you use that technology?
Mm.
You know, people have to be more, they have to use more control and decision making with their daily schedule. That they only use technology when they go to work, and then they come home, and what are they going to watch TV for 4 hours? Or are they going to do something else to receive a sense of self-worth and fulfillment, spiritual happiness, whatever it is? People need to make that decision for themselves. And maybe that's one positive aspect of some religions, that they really push that. But of course, religion has a lot more other things wrapped into it, like social control and manipulation. And
Yeah.
because spiritual leaders are still, they also have the same brains that political leaders and corporate leaders have. You know, they're
Yeah.
not different.
And funny enough, at the same time, while we are overstimulating ourselves, the attention span is dropping by the minute.
Mm-hmm.
The attention span, I don't know, it's yeah, a little bit more than a fly.
Yeah, it is. And the people who are affecting that attention span, they're not only reducing it, but they're maintaining most of each person's attention so that they control what information goes in each person's mind during that very brief period of time. So there's very little room for anything else except that product placement or advertisement or social message that they're trying to insert there. It's actually a big problem I experience with people who want to learn psychic abilities, especially if they're contacting me through email or through my YouTube channel. One of the most common complaints is that they did not succeed on their first attempt, or they did not succeed after only 1 or 2 days of trying the techniques, and then they give up. And it's a tragedy. I think in some ways, psychic or consciousness development is a form of mastery or skill building, just the way it is to become an artist or a musician or an accountant or whatever. It's just, it takes time to develop a specialized skill. And psychic development is the same way. It's not instant. And I think so many people out there, especially the children, they wish they could just push a button on an app and in 5 seconds suddenly have psychic ability just like that. And it's not the way it works. We all have the ability, but it takes time and concentration and prolonged focus and awareness and a lot of boredom. It's very boring a lot of the time to develop psychic ability. It's very boring. It's not entertaining at all until you succeed. Then it's a lot of fun. But until then, it requires a high level of commitment over time. It requires maintaining a positive outlook, even if you've failed many times. If you can continue your training, then you will succeed eventually. But that is a type of mental development that is disappearing rapidly. The kids these days, and I know I'm sounding like any other generation of adults, all the kids these days, but kids and adults also are quickly losing their ability to maintain self-discipline over an extended period of boring time to find success at what they want to achieve.
Yeah. No
And
intuition.
I know I'm generalizing, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know as well that there are other individuals out there. Of course, I know that, but in general, yeah, I would agree. And I also threw away my TV years ago,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't want to have that. I
Mm-hmm.
mm.
Yeah,
It,
that's great. That's
it's too
fantastic.
distracting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can see it in the stores, the electronic stores, that every year the TVs get bigger and bigger and bigger. How big does it have to be until you're happy, right?
Yeah,
There's
and
no
I don't
limit.
know about your programs, but I have to say, I sometimes check with my neighbors. I ask them and I say,
Mm-hmm.
because honestly, with all those channels that are available, there's only nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not even an interesting movie or something. Reality TV, reality shows, and so-called reality shows, and what have you. Only nonsense.
Right. It is nonsense, and I think there's an intelligence behind that for the people who are trying to create a certain effect in the watcher. They're just trying to stimulate their their neurotransmitters. They're trying to get people excited through fear,
Mm.
through over sexualizing imagery on TV, through drama. So all of these scenes and even stupid reality TV shows, that's all it is. It's sex and violence and aggression. That's all it is. They don't care about the script. They just want to make people's brains get overly stimulated to produce an addiction
Yeah.
effect. So they come back and watch the commercials in between. I mean, that's why movie theaters make a lot of money selling food, and why, and it's a two-way thing. Psychologists have realized that when a movie becomes a lot more stimulating, people start eating a lot more quickly. Or a terrible movie can seem a lot more enjoyable if the movie watcher is given something to eat at the same time, because the brain can't really tell it. It's just absorbing all these experiences. So the joy and the overstimulation from eating bad food in a movie theater makes the movies interesting. Or watching a movie that overstimulates your emotional state, survival mechanism, because it can't tell the difference between the movie and real life in that moment. Oh, you could be eating the worst popcorn in the world, but you're just gulping it down nonstop because you're watching this very violent scene. And what many movie makers know is that the best combination is violence with sex.
Mm-hmm.
You put those two together as in a horror film, and it's actually affecting closely related systems in the brain at the same time. So it's like taking the most powerful drug, or two powerful drugs at the same time, creating this incredible effect. The other thing too is if you watch a movie like that with someone, maybe you're on a first date with someone, you'll actually like that or feel a stronger attraction to that person after watching a violent or scary movie with them than you would have if you just sat across from them at a table and had a conversation. Because your brain got overly stimulated, but because they're sitting next to you, you attribute that stimulation to that person instead of to the movie, right? So
And
we
it
can't tell
feels
the
as
difference.
and then it feels as if, let's say, it was a war movie, as if you have been through war with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. You know,
Okay.
all the adrenaline is moving through your body. Basically, all the same or many of the same responses in the body that you experience when you're having actual sex are happening when you're watching some of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your date next to you. So you attribute that meaning to the person you're with. And then what happens if you enter into a long-term relationship with that person? And real life is not about going to the movies every day. It's just about ordinary conversation and dealing with ordinary daily struggles. And then people fall out of love with each other very quickly because they're losing that stimulation. Or some people enter into relationships where they argue all the time and there's always drama. That's because when they argue or cause these artificial conflicts, they're recreating or re-stimulating those neurotransmitters in the brain. So even though their marriage or their relationship is very unhappy, it's very stimulating. So they keep it going by always producing new conflict. We're
Oh yeah.
really we're really screwed up. No, we have a great potential in either direction. We can do wonderful things, or we could just be very confused and lost, I think.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, what would you suggest if somebody wants to start experimenting with psychic abilities? What
Mhm.
mindset would be okay? Where should they start? And yeah, and we already pointed out you need to have a little bit of endurance and patience.
Yes. there's so many resources out there. I think the most important ingredient is to choose an ability that is the most interesting to you. Because I've written a couple of books on telekinesis, and I could tell everyone the first thing you should learn is telekinesis because it's the easiest to succeed at. But that would be a lie, because it might not be very interesting to someone. Some people might be more interested in lucid dreaming, where you become conscious while the dream is still happening. And there's so many books out there about how to learn techniques for lucid dreaming, or out of body experience, or remote viewing. There's so many educators and books and videos to learn how to do remote viewing or practice clairvoyance. Or you could find a local teacher. I think it's important for mediumship to learn with an experienced teacher, because that's very complex. It's not as simple. It's not nearly as simple as telekinesis. There's a lot to it. But find a trainer in your hometown. Find a club or a group that does this all the time, and see if you can find a community that you feel safe with, who can educate you. But follow your inspiration and just stick with it. There's so many books out there that have a general explanation for the different types of psychic experiences. So you could read one of those and see the one that appeals to you or interests you the most. And then start Googling techniques for doing that, or meet the people who do those things and get their advice, how they should get started. Once in a while, I attend a conference about paranormal or parapsychological abilities. And there are other people there, and we exchange ideas, we exchange experiences, we learn from each other. And so people should just start following their inspiration, get the instructions, and then don't give up. All you have to do to succeed, you have to want it. If you really want to develop your psychic ability, you can. But if it's just a mild interest, most people will give up very quickly. Go do something else. Go learn to play the piano. Go, develop some other skill instead that produces faster results. But if you really want it, you can have any of these experiences for yourself, because it's part of being a human being, having a consciousness, and everyone has the ability. And you don't have to get anybody's permission. You don't have to get someone's special blessing. You don't have to get a special ceremony, although ritual and ceremony can be very helpful in the right context. Or it can be a way where you give your personal power to someone else. So you have to be very discerning what you do when you use ritual or ceremony with other people. Do you want to give your power away, or are these ways to enhance your power? And only personal experience can answer that question for each person individually.
Yeah. Wow, that was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed it very much. I'm so happy that you
Me
came
too.
on.
Yeah, we covered a lot of territory. That
Oh,
was
yes.
wild. And I'm very sorry about my cold. I didn't think I would be coughing so much. But,
yeah, that's okay. We had very funny internet interferences. Your image froze a lot, but the sound was okay and it was going on, so I didn't stop it or anything. But yeah, it was always telling me that your internet connection is not stable.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be it.
Yeah. That could be it. Yeah, I don't know.
But
Do you have that sometimes, that your internet connection is unstable?
I think it happens sometimes, but sometimes electronics behave strange when I'm going through different emotional states too.
Yes,
So
that's true.
it could be that, funny things happen, and hopefully maybe it's just a message that's something important is happening here. And I think this is a very important conversation that we had, especially for people new to these experiences. They just got a big education for how to think about things and how to make choices for how they develop themselves.
Yeah, I think so too. So thanks again. That was it. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Sean McNamara. And I hope you come back, Sean. We have to talk again one day.
I hope so too. I really appreciate your work. Your other are great. Thanks for
Okay.
doing everything you do. It's badly needed in this world. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So, bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe and sound and start experimenting. Bye-bye.